Frank Dalton, 68 years old, received a gift box from his long-estranged son, Ethan. Inside was a bottle of premium whiskey with a handwritten happy birthday card. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Happy birthday. Just 2 words. Written in a hand I recognized the instant my eyes landed on them. Slanted letters pressed a little too hard into the card, as if the pen itself had been carrying a weight. For 20 years I'd seen that handwriting on homework sheets, grocery lists he'd leave me on the counter, even the note he scrawled the day he moved out. My son's handwriting. But there was no signature this time. No "Love Ethan," no little joke the way he used to sign his name with a crooked smiley face when he was younger. Just those 2 words hanging on the page like they were afraid to say anything more. The box had arrived that morning, my 68th birthday. No return address, just my name written across the cardboard in that same all-too-familiar script. Inside, beneath the crinkle of packaging paper, sat a bottle of whiskey. A beautiful thing, the kind you'd see locked behind glass at a specialty shop. Deep green label gold lettering a wax seal on the cork, like it had been made for someone more important than me. For a long time, whiskey had been my small joy. Not in excess, not to drown myself, but as a ritual. After a day fixing fence posts, cleaning gutters, or mowing the yard, I'd pour a single glass. My wife Linda would sit with me on the porch swing, her hand warm against mine, the crickets filling the spaces between our words. We'd watch the fireflies and sip in silence. That was living. That was peace. But that was before my heart attack. 3 years ago, I gave it up. Doctor's orders, no alcohol, no sodium-heavy foods, no late-night indulgences if I wanted to live past 70. Ethan had been there in the hospital when the doctor told me. He knew. He sat in the chair at the corner of the room, thumbs moving across his phone, barely looking at me. At the time, I convinced myself he was too shocked to speak. Now, staring at this bottle, I wasn't so sure. My relationship with my son hadn't exploded the way you see in movies, no screaming match, no slammed doors. It had just ended. He skipped a Sunday dinner once. Then Thanksgiving. By the second Christmas, we weren't talking at all. Silence settled in like a squatter you can't quite evict. And here it was again, wrapped neatly with a bow, pretending to be a gift. I turned the bottle in my hands. Light from the kitchen window caught the amber liquid inside, making it glow as though fire lived in the glass. For a brief moment, I thought about Linda, about the sound of her laughter when she'd insist on pouring just half a glass for herself. But the thought cut me deeper than I was ready to bleed. I set the bottle down on the table, pushed it to the far end, and reached for my coffee. Cold. That's when Robert Carson came to mind. Robert, my son's father-in-law, was the kind of man who never showed up empty-handed. Always had tools rattling in the back of his truck, always the first on a ladder when a neighbor's roof needed patching. 2 summers ago, when a storm ripped half my shingles off, Robert was pounding nails into my roof before I'd even laced my boots. A man like that deserved a good bottle more than I did. The thought settled into me, steady and right. Leaving the whiskey to gather dust on my shelf would be wrong. Giving it to Robert would give it a story, a purpose, something shared instead of hidden. By mid-afternoon, I had the bottle buckled into the passenger seat of my old Chevy. Old habits die hard. I couldn't stand the idea of it rolling around, clinking against the dashboard. The October sun slanted low across the fields, painting the soybean stubble gold. Smoke from a burn pile drifted faintly across the road. It was the sort of day Linda would have insisted we drive with the windows down. Robert's house sat on a rise at the edge of town white clapboard, with a wraparound porch that looked like it had been lifted from a postcard. He met me at the door, sawdust still clinging to his boots, a red flannel shirt rolled to his elbows. His eyes went straight to the bottle in my hands. "Frank, what's this?" he asked. "From Ethan, I told him offering it forward. Figured you'd enjoy it more than I would." He lifted his brows, turning the bottle in his hands, reading the label. "This is something, Frank. This is the kind of thing you put away for a special night." "Then make tonight special," I said, and I meant it. Robert grinned that easy, weathered grin of his. "I think I will." "Thank you." I left his house feeling lighter, the late light slanting across my dashboard as I drove home. And yet, a thought nagged at the back of my mind. Ethan had never been one to spend money like this. When he was younger, he'd borrow cash for gas and forget to pay it back. So why now? Why a bottle? He knew I couldn't drink. I shook the thought away. Not everything needs a reason, I told myself. Some gifts are just gifts. That evening, I cooked a pot roast, the house filling with the familiar scent of onions and carrots. Meals like that were meant for company, but I ate alone. The steady tick of the wall clock filled the silence. I had just set the last dish in the drying rack when the phone rang. "Hello." A pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Dad." My hand tightened on the receiver. "Ethan, happy birthday?" He said, the words coming a beat too late, like he had to remind himself to say them. "You got my gift?" I did. "Well, what did you think? It's a nice bottle." "Did you try it yet?" His tone sharpened, almost too casual. "No." I passed it along to Robert. Thought he'd get more use out of it. Silence. Not static, not a dropout. Just a long, heavy pause that filled the line. "You gave it to Robert?" he repeated, voice cooler now. "That's right." There was the sound of a slow exhale, then click. The line went dead. I stood in the kitchen, the receiver heavy in my hand, the clock ticking on like nothing had happened. My gut twisted not from the roast, but from something else. Something I couldn't name yet, but felt in my bones. And though I didn't know it then, that simple decision to give Robert the bottle was the choice that would change everything. The morning after Ethan's call, I tried to shake the unease that had settled in my chest. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, sat down with the paper, and told myself not to overthink. But the clock over the stove ticked too loudly, every sound of the house exaggerated against the silence. I couldn't get his voice out of my head that pause when I said I'd given the whiskey to Robert. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but waited like a rope pulled tight on both ends. By mid-morning, I stepped outside, hoping the air would loosen whatever knot I carried inside. October sunlight had that pale, washed-out look, stretching long shadows across the yard. I raked a pile of leaves and bagged them just for something to do. The body remembers work even when the mind is restless. At noon, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was local. I answered anyway. "Mr. Dalton, a woman's voice. Yes, this is Linda Carson, Robert's wife." Her tone was taut, clipped, like someone trying not to let fear spill over. "I thought you should know Robert's in the hospital. He collapsed this morning." The rake slid out of my hand. Collapsed. "They think it might be some kind of poisoning," she said. In the background, I heard the mechanical beeps of monitors, a nurse's shoes squeaking on tile, the low murmur of voices. "He was fine last night. We shared a drink with dinner, and this morning he could barely stand." Poisoning. The word hit like a hammer to the chest. My eyes flicked back to the kitchen window, where the empty space on the table reminded me of the bottle I had passed on less than 24 hours ago. "Did he eat anything unusual?" Linda asked. My mouth went dry. "No," I said, slowly. "But I gave him a bottle yesterday. A gift." Her silence was telling. I could picture her pressing a hand to her mouth, trying to process it. "From Ethan?" she asked at last. "Yes." "I'll tell the doctor," she said, her voice clipped and sharp now. "If you think of anything else, anything, call me." I promised I would, and hung up. Then I stood in my kitchen for a long time, the October light slanting pale through the blinds, and felt the air thicken around me. I went to the trash bin, searching without knowing what I was looking for. Near the bottom, under coffee grounds and scraps of onion peel, something white caught my eye. A small plastic vial, the kind vitamins come in. No label, just a dusting of fine powder clinging to the inside. My stomach lurched. I didn't remember throwing it away. Beside it on the fridge shelf sat a mason jar with a small pour of whiskey, left over from when I'd shared a taste with Robert before handing him the bottle. My hand shook as I pulled it out, set it next to the vial, and just stared. Gary. The name came to me immediately. Gary and I had served together 30 years ago. He'd gone into veterinary work, ran a small lab out near the edge of town. If anyone could tell me what was in that jar, it was him. And he owed me once I'd hauled his truck out of a snow-filled ditch in the middle of winter. He'd never forgotten. I called him. Gary, I need you to test something for me. Quietly, what is it, whiskey? And maybe something else. He didn't ask more. Just said, bring it by after closing. That evening I drove out to his lab, the mason jar wrapped in a brown paper bag on the passenger seat like a guilty secret. The drive was quiet, the sky bleeding into dusk. My old Chevy hummed steady, but inside me everything felt unstable. Gary met me in the parking lot, still in his lab coat sweatshirt underneath. This is the kind of thing I'm going to regret, isn't it? He asked, taking the bag. Just tell me what's in it. He nodded, disappeared inside, and left me waiting in the truck. I sat there with the engine idling, staring out at the fading light, counting the beats of my heart. I thought about Ethan's voice on the phone. That long pause. That sharp question. Did you try it yet? My hands tightened around the steering wheel. The call came the next day, just after noon. Gary's voice was quiet, deliberate. Frank, you're not going to like this. There's something in the whiskey. White snake root. In the right dose, it'll stop a man's heart. The words clamped down on me. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my ear, as though I could block the world out by sheer force. You're sure I ran it twice? Same result both times? I thought of Robert lying in a hospital bed because of something I had placed in his hands. You said he drank it? Gary asked. Yes. 1 glass. And you didn't. Numberbear Gary let out a long breath. Then you just dodged a bullet. The line went quiet. I sat in my kitchen, the mason jar still on the counter, the little vial beside it. My pulse hammered against my ribs, and a truth I hadn't wanted to name became impossible to ignore. Ethan hadn't sent me a gift. He'd sent me a message. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, the house too silent around me. Every creak in the floorboard sounded like footsteps. Every hum of the fridge felt like a warning. I closed my eyes, but behind them I saw Robert's face, pale and weak, and my son's handwriting on the birthday card, sharp, cold, unforgiving. I thought about the boy Ethan once was, how he'd sit at the kitchen table swinging his legs while Linda and I helped him with his math homework. I thought about his laughter when we'd grill hot dogs on the porch, how he used to reach for my hand when he was small. And then I thought about the silence on the phone when I told him I'd given Robert the bottle. It wasn't silence of surprise. It was silence of calculation. And in that moment, lying on that couch, I knew the distance between us hadn't been about drifting apart. It had been about a chasm Ethan himself had carved. And he'd just shown me how far he was willing to go to make sure I felt it. I woke the next morning with my body stiff from the couch, and my mind heavy with Gary's words, white snake root. A plant toxin. Enough to stop a man's heart. Robert's heart. My heart. The thought that I'd nearly carried death into my own body sat in me like a stone I couldn't swallow or spit out. The house felt different now. Every object, every corner seemed suspect, as if the shadows themselves were watching to see if I would miss something else, some other clue left behind. I moved through the rooms with my hands behind my back, like a soldier inspecting barracks, trying not to disturb anything, but needing to know if something had shifted. By mid-morning, the phone rang again. The sound sliced through the stillness like a knife. For a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail, but habit pulled me toward the receiver. "Hello, Dad." His voice. Calm, casual, too casual. "Ethan." I gripped the receiver tighter. "Ethan, I just wanted to check in. You got the whiskey right, I did?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You try it?" he asked. The question was smooth, almost rehearsed. I let a pause sit between us, measured, deliberate. "No," I said. I gave it to Robert Carson. The silence that followed wasn't just silence. It was the weight of intent. I heard him breathe once, slow, like a man buying time. "You gave it to Robert," he repeated as though tasting the words. "That's right. Why would you do that?" His tone sharpened now, slicing away the casual mask. I thought he'd appreciate it more. "You know I don't drink anymore." There was another pause, longer this time, heavy as an anchor dropped into deep water. I could almost feel him recalibrating on the other end of the line. Finally, he said, "Huh," and the line went dead. I stood there, holding the receiver, the dial tone buzzing in my ear, my own pulse drumming louder than any sound in the room. That one syllable, wasn't confusion. It wasn't surprise, it was frustration, calculation. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling just slightly. I stared at the clock on the wall. Each tick sounded louder than the last. That afternoon, I drove to the hospital. Robert lay pale against the sheets machines, humming at his side. Linda sat close, her hands clasped in her lap, eyes rimmed red but unyielding. When she saw me, she rose and pressed my hand with a force that told me she had more questions than she could afford to ask. "He's stable," she said. "But weak. They're still running tests." Robert opened his eyes, briefly catching sight of me. "Frank," he whispered, his voice raw. "That bottle, I said quietly. "Don't worry about that now." But the truth was I couldn't stop thinking about it. That bottle sat like a ghost between us, haunting the space, no matter how much we tried to speak around it. Later that evening, when I returned home, the house greeted me with the same oppressive silence. I brewed another pot of coffee not because I wanted it, but because it gave me something to do. The aroma filled the kitchen, but it tasted like nothing when I finally sipped it. I sat at the table with a legal pad and drew a line down the center. On one side I wrote, "What I know." On the other, "What I can prove." What I know. Ethan sent the bottle. Ethan knew I couldn't drink. Ethan pressed to know if I had tried it. Robert collapsed hours after drinking from it. Gary confirmed white snake root in the sample. What I can prove, Gary's lab test results. The mason jar of leftover whiskey. Ethan's phone call if my memory held. I stared at the two columns, wishing I could build a bridge between them. But bridges don't build themselves. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old digital recorder scuffed at the edges. I'd bought it years ago to record interviews for a veterans group project. I checked the battery. Half full. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and pressed my hand against it, feeling the weight like a reminder I needed to catch him in his own words. The next day I drove to Ethan's house. His place sat in a row of modern, neutral-colored homes, each one a copy of the next. His truck gleamed in the driveway, newer than mine, by a decade spotless. When he opened the door, his expression flickered first surprise, then calculation. Then the kind of forced warmth you give a neighbor, not a father. "Dad," he said as though the word itself were a test. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" I asked, stepping inside without waiting for him to invite me. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Everything was at right angles. Books lined up more for appearance than use. Nothing out of place. Nothing except the tension in the air between us. I heard about Robert, Ethan said, closing the door. Scary. Laya's with him now. The doctors think it might be a virus. I kept my tone flat. Is that what they think? That's what she told me. That's what they're saying. I followed him into the kitchen. On the counter sat 3 unopened bottles of liquor bourbon rye and single malt lined up like soldiers. Not one of them the brand he'd sent me. I stepped closer. Did you try the bottle you sent me? He laughed softly. The whole point was for you to enjoy it. You know, for your birthday. You know, I don't drink anymore. People change, he shrugged as if my life were of no particular consequence. Robert liked it, I said, watching him. Said his favorite pour was from the middle shelf. The single malt. He blinked once, slower than a reflex. My pulse quickened. Yeah, he said. Funny thing, I said, leaning forward just slightly. I never told you where it was stored. For a fraction of a second, his face froze the kind of stillness animals show when they sense danger. Then he recovered, giving a small laugh. You must have. You get chatty when you're sentimental. I didn't, I said, holding his gaze. The silence between us grew heavy. He reached for a dish towel, drying a glass that didn't need drying. His eyes stayed on the glass. Not me. Dad, he said, finally, you always overthink. Always looking for something to fix, even when no one asked. You sent me a $500 bottle I couldn't drink, I said. I'm trying to fix that. He put the glass down and spread his hands like a man with nothing to hide. Then maybe don't. Maybe give me the benefit of the doubt for once. His voice might have sounded reasonable to someone else, but I'd heard it for 30-some years. My son had a way of sounding true when he was rehearsed, and right now every word out of his mouth carried the weight of practice. I slipped my hand inside my jacket pocket, feeling the recorder's steady weight. His voice was on it now, every pause, every deflection. I'm going to ask you a question, I said, and I'm going to let the silence after it tell me the answer. His lips tightened just slightly. Okay, did you tamper with that whiskey? The kitchen fell quiet. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the wall clock, a car passing slow outside. Ethan didn't look away. He didn't speak. Finally, I said, "Goodbye, Ethan." I turned toward the door. Behind me, his voice followed, low-measured and sharp as a hook. Dad, you keep accusing me of things, you'll push me away. I stopped, but I didn't turn back. I'm not accusing, I said. I'm collecting. And then I left. The autumn air outside was sharp metallic. I walked to my truck, sat behind the wheel, and pressed stop on the recorder. The red light blinked off. The evidence sat in my pocket, heavy as truth. But as I drove away, my hand steady on the wheel, my head was not. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky was already sliding toward evening, the kind of October twilight that seems to arrive too early and stay too long. I killed the engine, sat in the truck for a few breaths, and tried to decide whether the conversation with Ethan had left me steadier or more shaken. The truth was, it had done both. On one hand, I had his words on the recorder, the weight of silence captured in digital form. On the other, silence itself isn't proof. A prosecutor couldn't hold it up in court and say, "Here is guilt, right here between the breaths." Inside the house, I reheated leftovers I couldn't taste and sat at the kitchen table with the recorder in front of me, a small plastic witness blinking once before going dark again. I thought about pressing play, listening back, combing through every pause for hidden meaning. But I didn't. I didn't need to relive it. I had been there, and I knew what I'd seen in his eyes when I cornered him with the truth. The phone rang just as I was scraping my plate clean. I almost didn't answer. Something in me was already braced for Ethan's voice again, but the caller ID flashed, Carson Linda. I picked up. "Frank, Her voice cracked on my name. "It's Robert." He collapsed again. They rushed him back into critical care. My gut dropped. I pushed the plate away, clattering against the fork. "What happened?" "They think his heart rhythm destabilized. He barely made it this morning, and now—" Her words trailed off, swallowed by the sterile beeping in the background. "I'll be right there." I didn't even change. I grabbed my coat, the recorder slipping into the pocket out of habit, and drove into town faster than I should have. The hospital parking lot was awash of harsh light and empty spaces. I parked crooked, left the keys in the ignition, and hurried through the sliding doors. The smell hit me first antiseptic, and burnt coffee the universal hospital scent. The volunteer at the desk didn't even look up when I asked where Robert had been moved. Room 214, second floor. When I stepped in, Linda was perched on the edge of a plastic chair, her hands clamped so tightly together it looked painful. Robert lay against the sheets, paler than before his chest, rising and falling with the steady insistence of the ventilator. Wires snaked from his arms and chest to the monitors that beeped and blinked in stubborn rhythm. Frank Linda whispered, standing. She gripped my arm like I was a post, keeping her upright. "Thank you for coming." I knotted my throat tight. "How is he?" "They don't know. They're trying to stabilize him. They said they found traces of some kind of plant toxin." Her eyes widened, searching mine for an explanation. I stepped closer to the bed. Robert's mouth parted with each shallow breath, his hair falling untidily across his forehead. He looked younger and older, at the same time fragile in a way I'd never seen him. This wasn't the man who had climbed onto my roof without being asked hammer-swinging before I'd even brewed coffee. This was someone caught in a fight his body wasn't equipped to handle. "Did he eat or drink anything unusual?" I asked, though. I already knew the answer. Linda hesitated. "We both had a glass last night, from the bottle you brought." Her voice cracked again. "He said it was the nicest whiskey he'd ever tasted. He wanted to save the rest for something special." My jaw clenched. "You need to tell the doctors that," I said. "Tell them it was new, unopened. Tell them I still have a sample from the same bottle." Her eyes searched mine. "Frank, do you think—" She couldn't bring herself to finish. "I don't know what I think. I lied. But I'll find out." Just then, the door opened, and a doctor stepped in, clipboard tucked under his arm. He was in his 50s, his face the practiced neutrality of a man who had learned to speak carefully around fragile hope. He explained in low tones about rhythms, enzymes, and the need for observation. He didn't say much about what they didn't know, and there was a lot they didn't know. When he left, Linda sat again, shoulders collapsing inward. I stood at Robert's bedside longer than I needed to, my hand resting on the rail. His skin was clammy beneath mine, his heartbeat stubbornly keeping time on the monitor. "I'll call you as soon as I know more," I told Linda. She nodded, but it was the kind of nod people give when they don't have any more strength to argue. The walk back through the hospital corridor felt longer than it should have. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold and relentless. By the time I pushed through the sliding doors, the October night air felt raw and metallic, colder than it should have been. In the truck, I sat for a long moment before starting the engine. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked like a man who'd been cracked but hadn't yet broken. "White snake root," I muttered, testing the words aloud. They sounded deliberate. They sounded mean. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and empty intersections. I pulled into the driveway, cut the engine, and sat in the dark, listening. The house loomed ahead of me, still and silent, but no longer harmless. Inside, I went straight to the fridge. The mason jar of whiskey was still there, half full, waiting. On the counter, the little white vial mocked me with its presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else knew about it, someone who shouldn't. I opened the trash bin. My body froze. The bag inside was turned around, tucked differently than how I'd left it. My stomach twisted cold. I pushed deeper, searching, and felt the breath leave my lungs. The vial was gone. I stood perfectly still, scanning the kitchen like the walls themselves might confess who had been here. The deadbolt had been set the way I'd left it. The windows locked. No broken glass. No forced entry. Someone had been in my house. Someone with a key. I pressed my palms flat against the counter, letting the truth settle into me. Ethan had keys. Old ones, from years back. After my heart attack, he'd come to the house to collect things for me while I was in the hospital. My slippers, my charger, my wallet. I never asked for the keys back. I assumed I'd left them on the counter. I never saw them again. I drew a slow breath, steadying myself. Panic wouldn't help. Panic was loud and stupid. I needed quiet, useful thoughts. I picked up the phone. "Gary," I said when he answered. "The vial. It's gone." He didn't waste time telling me I might be mistaken. "Then you need law enforcement looped in, Frank. Now." "The whiskey sample will prove contamination, but the vial was clean proof of handling. Whoever took it doesn't want you to have that." "I know. And Frank, don't let whoever did this think you're sleeping on it." "I'm not," I said, my voice low. When I hung up, I made coffee I didn't want and sat at the table with my legal pad. I drew 2 columns again, what I know and what I can prove. And this time I added a new line to the second column intruder. Missing vial. Evidence tampered. The house was quiet around me, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like it was listening. The next morning, the October light seeped pale through the blinds, the kind of gray-white glow that makes you wonder if the sun even bothered to rise. I hadn't slept more than an hour. The missing vial gnawed at me like a loose tooth. Every creak of the house, every tick of the clock felt like a warning. I sat at the kitchen table, the mason jar of whiskey in front of me, the recorder by my elbow, and the legal pad with my 2 columns staring back at me. What I know, what I can prove. The balance between them still wasn't enough. I had pieces of truth, but no bridge to make them stand. That was when I decided I couldn't carry this alone anymore. I picked up the phone and dialed the sheriff's office. After a short hold, a steady voice came on the line. "Detective Reyes. This is Frank Dalton. I said my throat dry. I think I may have information about a poisoning. I have evidence, a whiskey sample, and a recording." There was no hesitation. "Can you come in this afternoon?" "Yes." He gave me a time and an office number tucked in the back hallway of the station. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in days, the faint relief of passing part of the weight to someone else. I packed carefully. The mason jar went into a Ziploc bag sealed tight, then into an old cigar tin I'd once used for nails. The recorder went in next. I put the tin in a paper grocery bag, then slid that bag into another one. Double layers. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was common sense. Before leaving, I called Linda. She answered on the second ring, voice small. "Frank, I'm going to the police," I told her. "I have a sample, and something else." She exhaled a shaky breath. "Robert's resting. He keeps waking up and asking what day it is. I tell him, and he nods like he's not sure he believes me. Tell him I'll stop by after, if he wants to see a face that isn't asking him to be strong." She laughed softly, breathless. "He likes being asked to be strong," she said, "but he likes you more." I locked up, checked the back door, checked the windows twice, and walked out to the truck. The paper bag sat on the passenger seat like a person. I buckled it in. Habit is comfort when sense is scarce. The drive to the station was quiet. The grocery store parking lot I passed looked ordinary families carrying paper bags, cars pulling in and out. but the world didn't feel ordinary anymore. When I pulled into the police lot, I sat for a long moment before killing the engine. Detective Reyes met me in a small office with a single window that looked out at a brick wall. He was younger than me by a couple of decades, but older than a rookie. His tie had been straightened more than once that day, his eyes sharp but not unkind. He offered me water. I said yes, partly because my mouth was dry, partly because people notice when you refuse everything. "Tell me about the whiskey," he said. So I did. I laid out the dates, the words Ethan had used, the long pause that felt heavier than anything he'd actually spoken. I didn't hand him my theories. I gave him the index cards of the facts, one by one. Then I put the paper bag on his desk, took out the cigar tin, and set the mason jar and the recorder in front of him. Reyes didn't touch them right away. He asked questions that sounded small but weren't. "Who else has keys to your house? When did you last check your trash? Did you mention the vial to anyone besides your friend Gary?" When I finished answering, he picked up the recorder, weighing it in his hand, like a man testing how heavy a word might be if he had to carry it. "You understand," he said, "this doesn't become a case just because you and I feel it in our gut. It becomes a case when what you've handed me can survive other people looking at it." "I do," I said. "And I want other people to look at it." He nodded. "We'll send the liquid to the state lab. We'll make a copy of your audio. If there's cause, we'll move. If there isn't, we'll tell you exactly why we can't. That's all I ask." When I stood to leave, he said my name like he was picking it up to see how it felt. "Mr. Dalton." "Yes, don't speak to your son again until I tell you to. If he reaches out, note the time and what he says. Keep your answers shorter than his questions." I nodded, surprised at the sense of relief those words gave me. Someone else was finally willing to carry a corner of the weight I'd been holding. Outside, the afternoon had gone a dull gray, the kind of brightness that hurts your eyes more than it lights your way. I drove straight to the hospital. Linda was still at Robert's side, and the machines still hummed their stubborn rhythm. Robert looked more like himself by degrees. When he cracked his eyes open, he whispered, "You look like hell." "You should see yourself," I said. He smiled with just one side of his mouth, the way men do when smiling takes too much effort. "I heard you're making friends with the police." "I'm trying to make sure they're on our side when they show up," I said. He nodded faintly, drifting off again. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening to the machine keep him honest about his heartbeat. On the way home, the house had the gall to look exactly the same. Quiet, harmless. But I knew better. That night, I set a chair in the corner of the living room where I could see both the front and back doors. The house smelled faintly of new locks and old wood. I kept the lights on, not to see out, but so anyone outside could see me. Around 9, the phone buzzed. "Unknown number." I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, I played it back. "Dad, it's me. They're making a mistake. Those things they found, they're not what they think. You know me better than that. Call me, please." The voice was calm, measured, almost gentle. The kind of tone you use when you're trying to sell someone something they don't want to buy. I didn't call back. I wrote the words down on an index card, slid it into the fireproof box, and closed the lid. That soft click, the sound of the box locking, was the only sound that made me feel like I still had control of anything at all. Hospitals have a way of stealing time. Minutes drag, and then vanish in clumps, swallowed by beeping monitors and the shuffle of shoes on polished tile. I lost track of how many hours I'd spent there with Robert sitting in that hard-backed chair, while Linda dozed in, fits her head bobbing forward, only to snap awake when a nurse pushed through the door. Robert looked fragile beneath the white sheets, but he was still hanging on. Each time I saw the stubborn rise and fall of his chest, I reminded myself that he was a survivor. The man who'd climbed my roof without being asked wasn't going to leave this world quietly. Still, I couldn't shake the gnawing guilt I'd carried that bottle into his house. I'd placed it in his hands. Late in the afternoon, a doctor stepped in gray hair, neat expression carved from years of practice. He glanced at Robert's monitors before speaking. "We've stabilized his rhythm for now, but the toxin in his blood isn't common. We're consulting with toxicology." Linda clutched her hands tighter. "But he's going to make it." The doctor's pause lasted just a fraction too long. "We'll know more in the next 48 hours. He's a strong man." That was all the comfort she got. When he left, she turned to me, her eyes damp but fierce. "Frank, this isn't an accident, is it?" I thought of Ethan's voice on the phone, the pause after I told him I'd given Robert the whiskey, the way his face froze when I mentioned the middle shelf. "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." Her chin trembled. She glanced back at Robert, then lowered her voice. "Then we need to know who did this. I already do." Her eyes widened, searching my face for some hint that I was mistaken. But I wasn't. That night I walked the halls, unable to sit still. Hospitals all smell the same, sterile and tired at once. I passed a volunteer cart stacked with magazines no one wanted and glanced through the window into rooms where other families whispered the same prayers in different words. When I returned to Robert's room, Linda was asleep in the chair again. I sat beside the bed, leaning close to him. "You're going to make it," I whispered. "But I need you to hold on a little longer. I'm not done yet." His eyelids flickered, but I wasn't sure if he heard. The following morning I left the hospital early, the October sky still gray and heavy. At home, the house greeted me with silence, but it was the wrong kind of silence, too sharp, too alert. I checked the back door, the locks, the window latches. All fine. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been here watching. I made coffee, poured it black, and sat with the fireproof box open on the table. Inside were my index cards, each one a chapter of the story I hadn't asked to live. Ethan's words transcribed, the missing vial noted, the recording copied. Each piece of evidence was a nail hammered into a coffin I never thought I'd have to build for my own son. By noon, I was back at the hospital. Robert's condition had improved slightly, still weak, but his skin carried a touch of color now. Linda was knitting again, her hands moving just to keep from trembling. While we sat in that uneasy quiet, the door opened. A young woman stepped in, hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, eyes sharp but tired. "Leah, my daughter-in-law." She gave me a small, tense smile. "Frank, I'm glad you're here." I stood. "How are you holding up?" Her eyes darted toward Robert before settling back on me. Scared. Angry. Mostly scared. She hesitated. "Can we talk privately?" Linda caught the cue. She rose, touched Robert's hand, and said, "I'll give you 2 a minute." She slipped out into the hallway, leaving us in a silence heavy with things unsaid. Leah gestured toward the family lounge around the corner. It was a small room with a plastic coffee machine and 2 chairs, too straight to be kind. She didn't sit, and neither did I. "I don't know what you know," she said carefully, "but I know Ethan has been different for a long time. Distant. Secretive." Her fingers twisted together. "He keeps jars in the garage, dried plants. He says it's a hobby. He's joined online groups about herbal extraction." She swallowed hard. "I didn't think it connected to anything like this. I felt the ground tilt under me." "White snake root," I said. "Have you heard that name?" Her eyes flicked wide with recognition or fear. Maybe both. "Yes. I saw it in his search history once. I thought he was just reading. Detective Reyes will want to talk to you. Are you willing?" She nodded quickly. "I already called." I left a message. Relief and grief collided inside me. If you have anything, screenshots, messages, photographs of those jars, keep them. Let the detective pull the thread. She looked at me hard enough to see through me. Why would he do this to you? I thought of a dozen answers. Money I refused to give him. Love I didn't give the way he wanted it. Disappointments that had grown hooks over the years. But the truth was simpler, sharper. Because if he can't own the story, he'll burn the page. Her breath hitched. He asked me this morning if I'd heard from you, she whispered. He wanted to know if you liked the bottle. I told him you'd given it to my father. Her words landed like stones dropped in a well, rippling outward until I felt the weight of them in my chest. Thank you, I said softly, for telling me. I'm sorry, she said, and I knew she meant all of it, not just the piece she had spoken aloud. We returned to Robert's room together, where Linda had resumed knitting, as though her hands could shield her from the truth. We spoke of safer things, weather football, the cafeteria soup that barely deserved the name chicken noodle. But beneath it all, the truth sat heavy and undeniable. Later that evening, I went home and stopped at the hardware store. I bought 2 new deadbolts and a package of those cheap stick-on alarms that shriek when a door opens. The clerk bagged them like groceries and made a casual comment about winter coming early. I mumbled something about needing to get ahead of it, but in truth, I was already behind. At home, I installed the locks slowly and firmly, the muscles in my forearms remembering the old work. I set the alarms and tested them. They shrieked sharp and shrill. Good! By the time I finished, shadows had stretched long across the floor. I heated a can of soup and ate it, standing at the counter, the taste metallic. The phone buzzed on the hallway table. Unknown number. I let it buzz, then fall silent. Seconds later, a text came through. We need to talk, face to face, today. Then another, almost instantly, don't make this worse than it is. Ethan. I set the phone down like it might burn me. Then I wrote his words on an index card, slid it into the fireproof box, and closed the lid. The locks clicked into place on both doors. The alarms set. The lights left on. But I knew safety was an illusion. The days that followed blurred into one long vigil. I split my time between Robert's hospital room and the silence of my own house. At the hospital, the air buzzed with machines that kept time when his body couldn't. At home, the air carried nothing but the weight of my own thoughts. Both places made me feel helpless, but at least one gave me purpose. Detective Reyes called 2 days later. His voice was measured like a man balancing both caution and momentum. The state lab confirmed it. The whiskey sample you gave us tested positive for toxic levels of tremetil, the compound in white snake root. You were right. My grip on the phone tightened. What does that mean for Robert? It means the doctors know what they're treating. That's the good news, and the bad. The bottle alone isn't enough. We need more direct evidence of who put it there. Your recording helps, but silence on tape doesn't convict. I need you to keep documenting, but don't confront him again. That's my job now. I wanted to argue, to tell him silence had already shouted louder than words ever could. But I swallowed it down. Understood. That night, I sat in the living room with every light on. The cheap alarms screamed once when I tested them, then fell back to silence. I left the fireproof box open on the table, index cards stacked like thin shields. The words, "Don't make this worse than it is," stared back at me from Ethan's last text. At 11:42 p.m., the phone rang. This time I answered. Dad, Ethan said, his voice low, almost tender. We don't need the police between us. You know how people twist things. Just let me explain. My throat tightened. Explain what that bottle, it wasn't meant for you. The words sliced clean through me. Then who was it meant for? Silence. You gave it to Robert. he said instead, his tone cooling. "And now everyone thinks it's my fault. Isn't it?" "Be careful, Dad," he said softly, but the softness carried teeth. "You keep pushing this, you're going to regret it." The line went dead. I set the receiver down gently, my hand steady only because I forced it to be. Then I wrote his words on an index card, slid it into the box, and locked it. The next morning I found fresh scuff marks on the back door frame. Not enough to break in, but enough to let me know someone had been testing. The alarms hadn't gone off, which meant he hadn't tried to open it, just pressed close enough to leave a mark. That afternoon, I drove to Gary's. He opened the door before I knocked, like he'd been expecting me. "You look worse than last time," he said. "I feel worse." I told him about the late-night call, the scuff marks, the sense that the house itself was watching me. Gary frowned. "He's escalating. If the cops don't move fast, you need to be ready." "Ready for what? For him to stop waiting for you to drink his poison and try something louder." The thought sat in my gut like a block of ice. On my way home, I stopped at a hardware store again. This time I bought motion lights, 2 more deadbolts, and a roll of duct tape I didn't really need but couldn't leave behind. The clerk looked at me funny when I paid cash. I didn't care. That evening I installed the lights. They flared white across the yard, too bright, too sudden. Good. If he came again, I wanted him blinded. By midnight, I was back in my chair in the corner of the living room, eyes on both doors. The phone buzzed once with another unknown number. I didn't answer. Minutes later, I heard it soft against the siding. A scrape, then a tap. The motion light blazed. Through the curtain, I saw the outline of a figure retreating down the driveway, shoulders hunched, moving fast. I didn't chase him. I wrote the time on an index card. 12:17 a.m. Then I slid it into the box, closed the lid, and sat with my hands flat on the table until the adrenaline bled out of me. The next day I met with Reyes again. He flipped through the index cards I brought, his eyes sharp, his brow tightening. "He's circling you, he's not done." "Then stop him," I said, my voice harsher than I meant it to be. "We're close," he said. "But we need him to slip. We need him on tape, on text, on something we can show a judge without them asking twice. Meanwhile, he's outside my house at midnight." Reyes leaned forward. "Then document it, every scrape, every shadow. If you see him again, don't confront him. Just record. Call us after." I wanted to say it felt like cowardice, but the truth was it felt like survival. That evening, I went back to the hospital. Robert was stronger now, able to sit up for a few minutes at a time. He gripped my hand, his palm still clammy, but his voice firmer. "You look like you've been through hell," he said. "You're one to talk." He chuckled weakly, then grew serious. "Linda told me what you said." "About Ethan?" I nodded. "I believe you," he said. "But believing isn't proof. You need to nail him clean or he'll wriggle out and come back worse." His words weren't harsh, they were matter of fact. Advice from one stubborn man to another. On the drive home, I kept hearing that line, "He'll come back worse." That night, I set the recorder on the windowsill, red light glowing faintly facing the yard. I wrote a fresh index card, blank except for the date. I wanted to fill it with facts, not fear. At 12:33 a.m., the motion light flared again. This time I didn't just watch. I picked up the recorder, pressed record, and whispered into it. Footsteps outside. North Yard. 12:33 a.m. The silhouette lingered longer this time, pacing near the truck. Then it turned, staring toward the house. Even through the curtain, I felt the weight of his gaze. My breath caught. Finally, the figure moved off, swallowed by the dark. I pressed, slid the recorder into the box, and wrote the time down. My hands shook as I closed the lid. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just documenting what had happened. I was documenting what might kill me. The following morning I handed Detective Reyes the latest index cards, along with the recording from the night before. He listened with the same steady calm he always carried, but I saw the crease deepen between his eyebrows. "This is good," he said finally. "Not good that he's outside your house, but good that you documented it." "Time description audio. It shows escalation." "Escalation doesn't keep me alive," I said. "No. But it builds a case." His words were careful, but I heard the steel under them. He wasn't dismissing me. He was keeping me from tipping into panic. Still, panic was hard to fend off when you knew your son was circling your house at midnight. Reyes leaned forward, lacing his fingers on the desk. "We're drafting a preliminary warrant. It won't let us tear his house apart yet, but it will give us access to search for certain things. Electronic records, purchases, communications." I nodded, though my chest tightened. "And if he finds out?" "Then it means he's already worried," Reyes said. "Sometimes that's enough to push a suspect into making a mistake." The word suspect should have been a shield. Instead, it felt like a blade pressed against my ribs. My son wasn't a suspect to me. He was Ethan, the boy who used to fall asleep in the truck after Little League games, dusty cleats dangling off the edge of the seat. But that boy had grown into a man who could lace poison into a birthday gift. When I got home that afternoon, I walked the perimeter of the house before I even stepped inside. Both motion lights were intact. Both doors showed no new marks. But I didn't relax. I'd learned too much in the last week to trust what I couldn't see. Inside, the silence felt heavier than before. I brewed coffee I didn't want, just for the sound of it filling the pot. I sat at the table, pen in hand, and stared at the latest index card I'd dated. Nothing to write yet. The blank space stared back like a dare. At 4:17 p.m., the phone buzzed. "Unknown number." I answered. Dad Ethan said, his voice quick-clipped. "The police came by my place." I didn't reply. "You know what this looks like," he pressed. "It looks like you're trying to ruin me." "I'm not trying to ruin you," I said evenly. "I'm trying to stay alive." "That bottle wasn't for you," he snapped, and for the first time the smooth calm cracked. His anger bled through jagged and sharp. "You weren't supposed to." He cut himself off. Silence hung thick for 2 seconds too long. "Wasn't supposed to," what I asked, my voice low. "Forget it," he muttered. "You've always twisted my words. Always. Don't talk to me again unless you want this to get worse." The line went dead. I sat still, the phone hot in my hand, my pulse hammering. Slowly I set it down, reached for an index card, and wrote every word I remembered. Then I locked it away in the fireproof box, the click of the lid sounding louder than any slam of a door. That night I slept for maybe 20 minutes at a time. Every creak in the house dragged me back awake. At 2:03 a.m., the motion light flared again. I rose, recorder in hand, and whispered the time into it. This time the silhouette didn't linger. Just one step into the light, a pause, then gone. Like he was reminding me he could be there whenever he wanted. By morning, my hands shook so badly I spilled coffee grounds across the counter. I forced myself to clean every grain as if control over the small mess could balance the bigger chaos. When Reyes called later that day, I told him about the phone call, about the flare of the motion light. "You're documenting everything he asked, every word, every minute." "Good. Keep going. The warrant is in motion. If he slips once more, we'll have enough to move." His words steadied me, but only slightly. That evening, I drove back to the hospital. Robert was sitting up now, pale but stubborn, spooning at his dinner tray, like a man picking a fight with bland mashed potatoes. He grinned faintly when he saw me. "You look worse than I do," he said. "You've got better drugs," I replied. Linda laughed softly, the sound worn, but real. When she stepped out to speak with a nurse, I leaned closer to Robert. "I need to tell you something." He called again. He said the bottle wasn't for me. Robert's eyes sharpened, his grip tightening on the spoon. Then who the hell was it for? That's what I don't know. And that's what scares me. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. Don't let him scare you into silence, Frank. Scared men make bad choices. Careful men live to see the end. His words echoed later that night when I sat once more in the corner chair of my living room, recorder in hand. The motion light stood watch outside. The alarms waited to shriek if touched. And still I couldn't shake the certainty that Ethan was already planning his next move. The days slipped into a strange rhythm, mornings at the hospital with Robert, afternoons pacing my own house like a soldier on patrol nights, hunched in the corner chair, with the recorder balanced in my hand. Every sound carried weight. Every silence carried more. The threats began quietly. At first it was just the phone, calls from blocked numbers at odd hours. Sometimes silence, sometimes the click of a line being cut. Once a whisper too low to catch but sharp enough to raise the hair on my neck. Each time I wrote the time and the detail on an index card, slid it into the fireproof box and closed the lid. Then the deliveries started. One morning I stepped out to fetch the paper and found an envelope on the porch. My name was written across the front in Ethan's unmistakable hand. Inside just a single scrap of paper with 2 words. Next time. I sat on the step for a long while staring at those words. The October wind tugged at the edges, but I kept it pinned beneath my palm until my fingers cramped. Then I slid it into a plastic sleeve, wrote the date on an index card, and locked them both away. That evening when I told Reyes, his jaw tightened. He's taunting you, trying to rattle you into making a mistake. It's working, I admitted. Reyes leaned forward. Frank, listen to me. You're not alone. We've got the warrant. We're combing through his bank records, his computer history. But you need to keep doing exactly what you're doing. Document preserve, stay calm. If he escalates, it's evidence. Evidence puts him away. His words steadied me for the drive home, but when I pulled into the driveway and saw another envelope tucked beneath the wiper of my truck, my stomach lurched all over again. This one contained a single photograph, me sitting in my own living room chair, the window curtain half drawn behind me. He'd been close enough to take the picture. I locked every door twice that night, the alarms shrieking once when I reset them. I sat in the chair with the recorder pressed tight against my palm, the photograph laid flat on the table in front of me. The clock ticked, the motion lights flared once at 1:12 a.m., and I whispered the time into the recorder, my throat dry. By morning, my paranoia felt less like paranoia and more like survival. I checked every door, every window, every corner of the house before making coffee. The photograph stayed sealed in a plastic sleeve, an index card noting photo of subject in own house, taken from outside, time, location unknown. When I brought it to Reyes later that day, his eyes narrowed. This is harassment, stalking, and intimidation. It's more than enough for us to tighten the warrant. Then why is he still walking free? I asked, sharper than I meant to. Reyes didn't flinch. Because the law requires us to build a wall, not just throw bricks. But we're stacking them, Frank. He won't climb out of this. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But belief doesn't keep you warm at 2 a.m. when you hear a noise in your backyard. That evening at the hospital, Robert was sitting up stronger, sipping at a cup of broth Linda held for him. His color had returned in faint shades enough to give me hope. You look like a man who hasn't slept in weeks, he told me, his voice hoarse but steady. I could say the same. He smiled faintly. Linda says you've been writing everything down. Index cards, right? I nodded. Good. Paper doesn't forget. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Don't let him scare you quiet. He wants you isolated. You stay loud, you stay stubborn. That's how you beat him. His words settled in me, heavy but right. That night I returned home to find the trash bin tipped over in the driveway. Coffee grounds and apple peels spilled across the gravel. It looked like raccoons at first, but the bag that should have held my shredded bills and old receipts was gone. Ethan wasn't just circling anymore. He was digging. I swept up the mess, every scrape of the broom loud in the night. Then I sat again in the corner chair, the recorder steady in my hand. At 12:46 a.m., the motion light flared. A figure lingered longer this time, pacing slow near the truck. Then something hit the siding of the house hard enough to echo, soft enough not to leave a mark. I whispered the time and sound into the recorder, my pulse thundering. The figure moved off, swallowed by the dark. I sat there until dawn, eyes burning, hands clenched tight around the recorder. By sunrise, I realized something I hadn't admitted even to myself. Ethan didn't just want me gone. He wanted me afraid first. Afraid enough to break, to stop documenting, to stop fighting. I looked at the index cards stacked neatly in the fireproof box. Each one was a refusal. Each one was proof that I hadn't broken yet. And I swore as I slid the latest card inside that I wouldn't break for him. Not now. Not ever. By the 10th day, my house no longer felt like mine. It felt like a stage where Ethan could choose his entrances and exits, leaving me to sit under the spotlight. Every corner seemed to carry a shadow that didn't belong to it. Every silence had a breath behind it. The intimidation grew sharper. It started with the locks. One afternoon I came home from the hospital and found faint scratches around the front door deadbolt, as if someone had tested a key that didn't quite fit. The back door showed the same. The alarms hadn't shrieked, but the metal told the story well enough. I crouched low, tracing the marks with my thumb, my pulse thudding in my ears. That night, when the motion lights snapped on, I didn't just sit in the chair. I crept to the window and parted the curtain an inch. The silhouette stood in the driveway, shoulders squared, head tilted toward the house. He didn't move for nearly a minute. Then without hurry he turned and walked away, as though leaving me a message carved in the air: I can wait. The next morning I called Reyes. He listened without interrupting, then said, "He wants you rattled. That means he knows we're close." How close, I asked. "The warrant is expanding. We'll be able to search his property, seize electronics, pull receipts." "But Frank," his voice tightened, "until then you need to keep your head. Don't engage. Don't step outside when he's circling. You're not bait, you're the witness." "I feel like both," I muttered. That afternoon I stopped at the hardware store again. This time I bought a steel bar lock for the sliding door, extra batteries for the alarms, and a small safe I didn't truly need, but bought anyway. The clerk asked if I was preparing for winter storms. I said yes. Easier than telling him I was preparing for something worse. When I got home, I installed the bar lock, tested it 3 times, then walked the yard with a hammer and nails boarding the loose slats of the fence. My hands remembered the rhythm of work, the feel of the wood vibrating with each strike. For a few moments it felt like control, but control slipped again that evening. At 8:37 p.m., the phone buzzed. This time I answered on the first ring. "Dad," Ethan said. His tone was clipped, breath tight, like he'd been pacing. "Why are you dragging strangers into this? Why are you talking to the cops? Because you left me no choice. You think they care about you? They'll twist it. They'll say you're paranoid. They'll laugh when they hear your little recordings." His voice dropped lower. "You think index cards make you safe?" My throat tightened. "They make me ready." Silence. Then he chuckled, soft but sharp. "Next time maybe I won't be so quiet." The line went dead. I wrote his words on an index card, slid it into the fireproof box, and closed the lid. But this time the click of the lock didn't sound steady. It sounded fragile. 2 nights later, the threats grew physical. I was in the kitchen making coffee when a thud rattled the back door. Not a knock, a blow. The alarms shrieked high and thin. My pulse leapt into my throat. I grabbed the recorder, whispered the time, and crept low toward the door. Through the window, I saw the shape of a brick on the porch. A piece of paper was taped to it, flapping in the wind. I didn't open the door until I was certain the yard was empty. When I finally stepped out, the night was still. The note was short. 2 words again. Not enough. I sealed it in plastic, logged the time, and called Reyes. He came the next morning, the brick and the note bagged in evidence. His jaw was set tighter than I'd ever seen. This is escalation. It won't stop here. What happens when he decides to stop waiting outside? I asked. Reyes looked at me for a long moment. Then we'll be ready. The warrant is being signed. The raid will happen within days. Days felt like a sentence too long. That night I sat in the corner chair again, but this time with the hammer still on the table beside me. The motion lights flared once at 12:19 a.m. But the silhouette didn't linger. It moved past the truck, quick and sure, like a man who knew exactly where he was headed. I held my breath until the light clicked off, then whispered the time into the recorder. When dawn finally broke, I realized I hadn't closed my eyes once. My body ached, my hands trembled, but the fireproof box sat beside me heavier than ever. Each index card, each note, each recording was a promise I had made to myself. I will not let this vanish into silence. But deep down, I knew Ethan was waiting for silence. And if I faltered once, if I stopped documenting, he would have what he wanted. And so I sharpened my pencil, pulled out a fresh card, and wrote at the top in block letters, intrusions escalating, locks tampered, threats physical, raid imminent. The card stared back at me, stark and certain. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was survival written in ink. The morning after the brick, the house felt smaller than ever. Every window looked like a target. Every shadow carried the outline of my son. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee untouched, listening to the tick of the wall clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. It struck me then that silence had become its own kind of torture, louder than any threat Ethan could send. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Reyes. "We've got the warrant," he said without preamble. "We're moving tonight. His house, his garage, his truck. You need to stay home. I want to be there." "No." His voice was firm, not unkind. "This isn't about what you want, Frank. It's about keeping you safe. Let us do our job. If we find what we expect, it'll speak louder than anything you could ever say." I swallowed the argument, rising in my throat. "Then find it." That night I couldn't sit in the corner chair. My nerves wouldn't let me stay still. I paced from window to window, staring out at the dark yard, waiting for the motion lights to flare. At 9:14, they did, but this time it wasn't Ethan. It was Reyes pulling into the driveway, headlights washing the siding of my house. He stepped out his jacket, zipped tight face, pale in the glare. "It's done," he said. "What did you find?" Reyes took a breath. "You should sit." I didn't. I stood in the doorway as he continued. The garage was full of jars, dried plants, powders, extracts, labeled, dated, cataloged like someone building an apothecary. We found white snake root in multiple containers. We found notes, handwritten instructions on how to prepare it. Some pages with dosages, some with experiments. My stomach churned. "Experiments on animals," Reyes said quietly. "Rats, mostly. Notes about reactions times to collapse recovery." I pressed a hand to the doorframe. What else? Reyes reached into his jacket and pulled out a clear evidence bag. Inside was a folded piece of paper yellow legal pad, torn at the edge. My name was written across the front in Ethan's handwriting. "We found this in a locked drawer in his desk," Reyes said. I stared at the bag. My hand twitched with the urge to grab it, but I didn't move. Do you want to know what it says? Reyes asked. My throat tightened. Tell me. He opened the bag, carefully slid the paper out, and read aloud. Some fathers don't deserve to outlive their mistakes. The words landed like a blow. I turned away, staring out at the night yard, the motion lights glaring against empty gravel. My chest ached, not from fear this time, but from grief so sharp it felt like glass. Reyes tucked the note back into the bag. We'll get this processed. It's strong evidence of intent. Combined with the jars and the extracts, it's damning. Where is he now? I asked. Gone, Reyes admitted. He wasn't home when we arrived. His truck is missing. We've got an alert out and we'll find him. But for now, be cautious. Don't open the door unless you see a badge. Don't answer calls unless they're from me. I nodded slowly, though the weight in my chest didn't ease. That night, I didn't bother sitting in the corner chair. I sat at the kitchen table with the recorder in front of me, the fireproof box open at my elbow. I pulled out a fresh index card and wrote, Raid executed. Jars found. White snake root confirmed. Evidence letter addressed to me. Suspect fled. The words steadied me as much as they broke me. At 2:11 a.m., the motion light flared. My breath froze. I rose, slowly, recorder in hand, and crept to the window. The driveway was empty. But when I stepped out the next morning, there was a single object left on the hood of my truck. A photograph. It showed Robert in his hospital bed, eyes half-closed, tubes and wires framing his face. I turned it over. On the back, Ethan's handwriting again. You should have been the one. I sealed it in plastic, slid it into the box, and wrote the time on a fresh card. When I handed the photo to Reyes later that day, his expression hardened. He's spiraling. This isn't just about resentment anymore. It's obsession. You're the target, but he's widening his circle. He went after Robert, I said quietly. And he'll try again if we let him, Reyes said. But he's making mistakes. The more he reaches, the more evidence he leaves behind. That's what will undo him. I nodded, but the words didn't settle. Because every mistake Ethan made still landed first in my lap, my yard, my house. That evening I sat in Robert's hospital room. He was stronger now, able to sit up longer, even manage a few steps with Linda's help. His voice was rough but steady enough when he spoke. I heard about the raid, he said. Linda told me. I nodded. They found plenty, enough to put him away. But not enough to stop him from running, Robert said. No, I admitted. He studied me for a long moment. You've got a choice, Frank. You can let the fear hollow you out, or you can let it make you stubborn. The first one kills you faster than any poison. His words carried weight, carved deep by his own brush with death. I held them close as I drove home. The house was quiet, the motion lights steady, the locks set. I sat at the table, pulled out a fresh card, and wrote Robert's words, Fear hollows, stubbornness survives. Then I closed the box, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark, waiting. The days after the raid stretched long and thin like wire pulled too tight. I kept expecting the snap. Reyes called often sometimes just to check if I was still holding steady. He told me the warrant had given them plenty herbs extracts, digital records, but not the one thing they needed most, Ethan himself. My son had slipped through before the raid, and now every passing day without him in custody stretched the unease further. He's on the run, Frank Reyes said one afternoon. That means he's desperate. Desperate men make mistakes, but they're also dangerous. You need to keep your doors locked, your alarms set, and your recorder handy at all times. I told him I already was, but truthfully, no lock or alarm could keep the weight out of my chest. That evening, I came home from the hospital to find another envelope on the porch. No return address. My name scrawled across it. I brought it inside, sealed it in a plastic sleeve, and only then opened it. Inside was a single slip of paper with the words written in bold strokes. You can't hide behind them forever. No signature, no explanation. Just the taunt. I logged it on an index card, slid both into the fireproof box, and sat at the table staring at the lid. Each new threat felt like a rope tightening, pulling me toward something inevitable. At 11:03 that night, the motion light flared again. I rose, recorder in hand, and crept to the window. The figure didn't linger near the truck this time. He crossed the yard, paused near the back porch, and bent low. My throat clenched. The alarms shrieked a second later. I lunged to the back door but didn't open it. Through the window I caught a glimpse of him, shoulders hunched, head low, moving fast toward the trees. When I stepped outside after he'd gone, a small cardboard box sat on the porch. I opened it carefully, heart pounding. Inside were dried plant clippings, white snake root or something that looked close enough. The smell was sharp, bitter. Beneath them lay another note. Next dose won't miss. I sealed everything in plastic, logged the time, and called Reyes. By the time he arrived, the box sat in the center of my kitchen table like a live wire. He bagged it carefully, his jaw set. He's trying to show you he's still in control. But he's slipping. The closer we get, the sloppier this becomes. Sloppy still kills, I said. Not if we catch him first. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. But later that night, as I sat in the corner chair with the recorder in hand, I kept picturing Ethan crouching near the porch, his hands moving fast, his eyes darting toward the house. My house. The next morning, Leah called. Her voice was tight, breathless. Frank, I found something. In the garage, hidden behind a stack of boxes. More jars, labeled, some with dates, some with names I asked. Yes, Robert's, yours, mine. The air drained from my lungs. Did you touch them? No. I left everything exactly where it was. But I took photos. Send them to Reyes, I said quickly. Now. She hesitated. Frank. Why would he write our names because he wasn't experimenting anymore? I said. He was practicing. That evening I drove back to the hospital. Robert was stronger sitting up without help, his voice steady enough to bark at the nurse for better soup. But when I told him about the box on my porch, his humor drained away. He's circling closer, Robert said grimly. You've got to be ready for him to step inside next. I know, I said quietly. Then don't be caught flat-footed. Fear's a tool, Frank. Let it sharpen you, not break you. His words echoed as I drove home. That night I set the recorder on the windowsill again, the red light glowing faintly against the dark. I kept the hammer within reach, my hand, brushing it now and then, just to reassure myself. At 12:27 a.m., the motion light flared. I rose slowly, heart hammering, and crept to the curtain. The figure wasn't near the truck this time. He was at the back door, crouched low, testing the lock. The alarm shrieked sharp and merciless. He didn't run immediately. He stood shoulders square, head tilted toward the window. Even through the glass, even in the dark, I knew it was Ethan. My son. We stared at each other for a long breath. Then he raised his hand, 2 fingers tapping the glass lightly like a knock no one else could hear. And then he turned and slipped back into the night. I sat at the table, afterward recorder in hand, whispering the time into it with a voice that shook despite every effort. I wrote it all on an index card and slid it into the box. The house was silent again. Too silent. I realized then that Ethan wasn't just testing my locks, he was testing me, and I swore as I closed the box and set it back on the shelf that I would not fail his test, not this time. The morning after Ethan tapped on my back window, I didn't make coffee. My hands were too unsteady to hold the filter without spilling grounds across the counter. Instead, I sat at the table with the recorder rewinding and replaying the faint shriek of the alarm, the silence after my own voice whispering the time. Proof that he had been here. Proof that I wasn't imagining the shadows. At 9:02 a.m., Reyes called. His tone was clipped but electric, the voice of a man who'd been given a green light. "We've secured a full warrant," he said. "House garage, electronic devices, vehicles, storage units, everything. We're moving in 2 hours." I gripped the phone tight. "And Ethan, if he's there, we'll take him in. If he isn't, the evidence will still speak." I nodded even though he couldn't see. "I want to come." "No, Frank. This isn't something you need to see. Let us handle it." But staying behind felt like letting the story move on without me. I'd been carrying the weight of this truth alone for too long. Still, I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, but because I knew the fight would waste precious time. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed again. Reyes's voice came through steady but heavy. "We found more than we expected," he said. "What do you mean?" He took a breath. The garage was worse this time. Jars stacked high, not just plants, but liquid extracts in labeled droppers, folders of handwritten notes. "We found a ledger, Frank. Dates, names, dosages. He wasn't just experimenting, he was planning." My chest tightened. "Planning what scenarios Reyes said. Each entry has initials. Some we've matched to you, Robert, even Leah. Different doses, times to effect, reactions." He was keeping score. I pressed a hand to the table to steady myself. "And there was also a letter addressed to you. Not like the last one, longer, detailed. We're processing it now, but from what I skimmed..." His voice trailed. "It reads like a manifesto. Blame. Justification." Anger turned into something meticulous. I closed my eyes, the image of Ethan as a boy flashing unwanted into my mind, sitting at the kitchen table with crayons, pressing too hard until they broke. That same intensity, sharper, now darker, and aimed straight at me. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice low. "Not there. His truck is gone. But we'll find him. The net's closing, Frank. He can't run far." When we hung up, I stared at the silent phone for a long time. The house around me hummed faintly, the fridge kicking on the clock ticking, the sounds of normal life. But nothing felt normal anymore. That evening, I drove to the hospital. Robert was stronger now, able to shuffle to the window with Linda's help. When I told him about the raid, his eyes sharpened with a grim satisfaction. "Good," he said. Let the evidence speak louder than his lies. But Leah's face was pale, her hands twisting in her lap. "Frank, do you ever wonder why?" "Why would he go this far?" I hesitated. "I've been asking myself that for years. Maybe it started small resentments, disappointments. Maybe it grew every time he felt slighted. And maybe he decided the only way to be seen was to turn himself into the storm." Her eyes brimmed, but she didn't cry. She nodded, the weight of it settling in. That night, I went home to a house that felt more like a bunker than a home. I checked the locks, the alarms, the motion lights. Then I sat at the table with a fresh index card and wrote, "Full raid executed. Jars extracts ledger manifesto letter found. Suspect fled." I slid the card into the box, locked the lid, and sat back in the chair. At 12:41 a.m., the motion light flared again. My breath caught. I crept to the window recorder in hand. The figure wasn't at the truck or the porch this time. He stood in the middle of the yard, arms at his sides, staring straight at the house. The light carved him into a silhouette, sharp and unyielding. He didn't move for nearly 2 minutes. Then slowly he raised one arm and pointed at the window. At me. The recorder shook in my hand as I whispered the time. My pulse hammered so loud it drowned out the rest. Finally he turned and walked away, swallowed by the dark. I sat at the table until dawn, the index card spread out before me, the recorder clutched in my fist. The evidence was stacking higher. Reyes was right. but so was the danger, because Ethan wasn't hiding in shadows anymore. He was standing in the light, daring me to keep looking. And I swore as the first thin line of sunrise cut across the horizon that I would. By the time the sun rose after that long night, my body ached, like I'd run miles without moving an inch. My hand still trembled faintly from clutching the recorder too long. On the kitchen table, the fireproof box sat like a sealed vault of my fear, every index card inside another nail in the coffin of what Ethan had become. Reyes called that morning, his voice sharper than usual, as though sleep had been in short supply for him too. "We're escalating surveillance," he said. "Marked and unmarked units are going to be around your property. You won't always see them, but they'll be there. If he shows himself again, we'll have eyes on it." "You don't understand," I said, staring out the window at my empty driveway. "He already knows I'm watching. Last night he stood in the yard, pointing right at me. He's not hiding anymore." "That's good," Reyes said. "The more visible he becomes, the easier it is to catch him. Visibility leaves trails. His calm was supposed to steady me, but instead it gnawed at me. Because trails don't always lead to arrest, they can lead to attack." That evening, Linda called from the hospital. Robert had walked the length of the hallway with help. His strength was returning, stubborn as ever. Her voice carried hope, and for a few minutes, I let myself feel it too. But when I hung up, the house dragged me back down. The walls felt too close, the silence too sharp. I sat at the table with a pen in hand, staring at a blank index card, unable to write. I didn't want to record another threat. I wanted them to stop. At 9:56 p.m., the phone rang. Unknown number. I answered anyway. "You're making this harder than it has to be," Ethan said. His voice was low, steady, almost soothing. "If you'd just listened, if you'd just trusted me, we wouldn't be here." "You sent me poison," I said. "That was never meant for you." His tone sharpened. "But you gave it away. You made it worse. And now you're dragging everyone else into it. I'm dragging the truth into it," I said, though my throat felt tight. Silence. Then a chuckle, soft but cold. "Truth doesn't save you, Dad. It just buries you slower." The line clicked dead. I sat there with the receiver in my hand, heart pounding, the words burning into me. I wrote them on a card, slid it into the box, and closed the lid. The click echoed louder than usual. At 11:32, the motion light flared. I rose, recorder in hand, and crept to the window. This time the figure didn't linger in the yard. He walked straight up to the truck, knelt beside the tire, and did something I couldn't see. Then he stood, turned his face briefly toward the house, and walked away into the dark. I waited until dawn before going outside. When I crouched beside the truck, my stomach dropped. The valve caps were unscrewed. The tires had been bled almost flat. Not enough to strand me completely, just enough to slow me, make me vulnerable if I tried to drive fast. A warning. A reminder. I control when you move. I logged it, photographed it, called Reyes. He arrived with an officer, their expressions grim. "He's tightening the noose," Reyes said quietly. "But this works for us too. Every action he takes is another line of evidence. It's stacking up." "Evidence doesn't patch tires," I muttered. "No," Reyes admitted. "But it keeps you alive longer than pretending it isn't happening." That evening I installed another set of alarms, this time on the windows. Every beep and click sounded too loud in the silence. But when the house settled, I felt a fraction safer. Not safe, just less bare. At midnight, I didn't sit in the corner chair. I sat at the table, every light on the recorder balanced in my palm. I stared at the front door, waiting. At 12:47 a.m., there was a knock. Not a tap, not a scrape. A knock. 3 sharp raps on the wood. The alarms shrieked instantly, but the knocking didn't stop. 3 more raps, then silence. I whispered the time into the recorder, my voice shaking, and stayed frozen until the alarms went still. When I finally rose and peered through the peephole, the porch was empty. On the step lay another envelope. Inside was a single slip of paper written in Ethan's sharp hand, tick-tock. I sealed it in plastic, logged the time, and slid it into the box. But for the first time, when I closed the lid, I realized I was trembling so badly I could barely hear the lock click into place. Ethan wasn't circling anymore. He was knocking. And I knew as I sat in that bright, silent kitchen that sooner or later he would stop knocking and start coming in. The knock on the door echoed in my head long after the alarms went quiet. For 2 days I lived in that sound, hearing it in the tick of the wall clock, in the creak of the floorboards, even in the distant rumble of trucks down the highway. Tick-tock. Ethan's words bled into everything, reminding me that time was his weapon now. Then, on the third morning, Reyes called. His voice carried the kind of clipped urgency that made me grip the phone harder. "We've got him," he said. For a moment, I didn't breathe. Where? 2 counties over. Sheriff's deputies pulled him in on a traffic stop. Truck matched the bolo. He didn't resist. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And the evidence, plenty, Reyes said. His truck was loaded. More jars, more extracts, a laptop. Notes. We'll be processing it for days. Between that, the letters, the recordings, and the lab results, the case is solid. Attempted murder, possession of a controlled poison, tampering with evidence, harassment, the works. I sank into the kitchen chair, the phone pressed to my ear, the fireproof box sitting open in front of me. The index cards inside stared up at me like thin little soldiers, each one a witness. For weeks I had been waiting for this moment, and yet it didn't feel like victory. It felt like collapse. Frank Reyes said softer, "Now you can breathe. He's not outside your house anymore." But that was the problem. For so long I'd lived with Ethan as a shadow at my window, a weight on my chest. Even with him gone, the shadow lingered. I drove to the hospital that afternoon. Robert was stronger, sitting in a chair by the window 4-line, tucked neatly against his arm. Linda hovered close, knitting in her lap. When she saw my face, her needles stopped mid-stitch. "They caught him," I said simply. Robert exhaled long and slow. "Good." Linda's eyes brimmed with tears. "It doesn't fix what he did." "No," I admitted. "But it stops him from doing more." Robert reached across his hand, shaky but steady enough to grip mine. "Then let the law carry it from here, Frank. You've done your part." But that night when I returned home, the house didn't feel lighter. The locks were still set. The alarms still shrieked when I tested them, but the silence pressed heavier than ever. Because now I had to face the truth I'd been holding off my son wasn't a shadow. He was a man, flesh and blood, who had chosen this path. And he was mine. 2 days later, Reyes called again. "We've been going through the laptop," he said. Emails, drafts of letters, search history. He'd been planning this for months, Frank. Maybe longer. There are files that go back years. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the kitchen window, staring out at the motion light unlit now. "Years," I repeated. Some of the documents read like journals. Anger, blame, fixation on you. It's dark stuff. But it's airtight. He won't walk away from this. I nodded, though the weight in my chest didn't shift. That evening I sat at the table with the fireproof box open, index cards spread before me. Each card was a memory, now Ethan's words, his threats, his silence. I thought of the boy who used to scribble homework at this same table tongue, sticking out as he pressed his pencil too hard. The boy who would look up at me with pride when he got the answer right. Where had that boy gone? When Linda called later, her voice carried a mix of relief and sorrow. "Robert's improving every day." The doctors say he was lucky. If he'd had more than that one glass, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Luck, I said quietly. And stubbornness. She chuckled faintly. That too. After we hung up, I sat in silence with the recorder in my hand. I pressed play, listening to my own voice, whispering times into the dark, listening to the shriek of alarms, the faint sound of footsteps outside. Proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. Proof that the danger was real. But proof doesn't erase bloodlines. The next morning, Reyes met me at the station. He slid a stack of photos across the desk evidence from the raid items seized from Ethan's truck. Jars of herbs, pages of notes, and one last letter printed from his laptop. It was addressed to me. You always said I was careless, but this time I was careful. Careful enough to make you afraid. Afraid enough to finally look at me. You won't admit it, but this was the only way I could matter. Even if I lost, I mattered to you again. I stared at the words until they blurred. Reyes said something about chain of custody, about trial prep, about airtight cases, but I barely heard. All I could hear was Ethan's voice layered over the page, the sound of him as a boy, asking me to watch his baseball game, the sound of him as a man whispering threats into my phone. The same voice, two different lives. That night I sat in the kitchen with the fireproof box closed and locked. I didn't add an index card. For the first time in weeks, I let the day pass without recording it. Because the evidence wasn't just his anymore. It was mine too, the kind I'd carry whether I wrote it down or not. Still, when the clock struck midnight, I found myself listening for footsteps outside. The silence was complete, and it was almost worse. The silence that followed Ethan's capture was different than the silence I had known before. When he was still free, the quiet had been sharp, alive with the possibility of his footsteps outside. Now it was heavier, duller, like a blanket pulled too tight across my chest. I wasn't waiting for knocks or threats anymore. I was left with the echo of what he'd already done. For the first few mornings, I woke expecting to see another envelope on the porch, another shadow pacing the yard. Each time the driveway lay empty, I felt both relief and grief. Relief that the danger had passed. Grief because it meant the boy who once came running home with scraped knees and muddy shoes wasn't just gone. He had been gone for years. I was only now admitting it. At the hospital, Robert was stronger by the day. He greeted me with a firm handshake, his color returning, his humor sparking again. "They'll kick me out of here soon," he joked. "Linda's already threatening to put me back on roof duty." I laughed, but it caught in my throat. "Don't push your luck." His eyes softened. "You look tired, Frank. Not from sleepless nights, different tired. The kind that comes when you realize you can't go back." He wasn't wrong. Linda often joined our conversations, her knitting needles clicking while she listened. She'd glance up now and then with an expression that was equal parts relief and sorrow. She had nearly lost her husband, and I had nearly lost my last illusions about my son. We both carried invisible scars. One afternoon, Leah came by while Robert napped. She sat with me in the lounge, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she barely touched. I keep going over everything she said. All the times Ethan seemed distracted. The nights he said he was working late, the jars in the garage. I thought it was just a hobby. I thought if I didn't press, it would stay harmless. I shook my head. You couldn't have known what he was capable of. Her eyes brimmed. But you did. The words weren't an accusation, not exactly, but they cut anyway. I stared down at my own hands, the lines and scars etched deep. I saw pieces, anger that burned longer than it should, silence that stretched too far. But I told myself it was just distance, just the way some suns drift. I never believed he'd turn that fire into poison. She nodded slowly, sipping her cold coffee. Now we all know. That night I sat in my kitchen with the fireproof box open. The index cards stared back at me, each one a chapter in the story I hadn't wanted to write. For weeks they'd been my lifeline. Now with Ethan in custody, they felt like gravestones, evidence of a war I had survived but not won. I pulled out one card at random. Tick-tock. Just 2 words, his handwriting sharp in my memory. I held it for a long moment before sliding it back into the box. Later, when the phone rang, my chest tightened. It wasn't Ethan this time. It was Reyes. "They're moving toward trial," he said. "The evidence is strong, your recordings, the letters, the jars, the laptop. It's enough to secure multiple counts of attempted murder, harassment, possession. He's not going anywhere." "Except prison," I said. "Yes." "But Frank..." Reyes hesitated. "You need to prepare yourself. He may try to fight this in court. He may try to turn it back on you. On me? You're the father. Defense will try to paint you as bitter, paranoid, exaggerating. They'll say you misread the situation, that you fueled the narrative. You need to know that's coming." I closed my eyes. The thought of hearing Ethan's lawyers twist my index cards, my recordings, my sleepless nights into something selfish or vindictive churned my stomach. But I knew Reyes was right. "Then I'll be ready," I said quietly. The next day I drove back to the hospital. Robert was walking farther now, his humor sharp enough to spar with the nurses. He clapped my shoulder, his grip firm. "You're carrying more than you should, Frank. Don't let it crush you. You did what had to be done." "I turned in my own son," I said. "You turned in a man who tried to kill you," he corrected. "There's a difference. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. But the line between Ethan the boy and Ethan the man was blurred in my mind. I saw him both ways at once, the child at the kitchen table scribbling homework and the silhouette in my yard pointing straight at me. That evening I sat at the table with a blank index card. For the first time I didn't write a time, a threat, or a description. I wrote just one sentence. My son chose this path, and I must choose mine. I slid it into the box with the others, closed the lid, and let the click of the lock settle into the silence. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like mourning. The weeks leading up to trial felt like being trapped in the slow grind of a machine, every gear turning whether I wanted it to or not. Court schedules, discovery deadlines, motions, words I never used to think about became part of my daily vocabulary. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced myself for another update from Reyes or the prosecutor's office. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a witness. The prosecutor, a woman named Claire Matthews, met me in a conference room at the courthouse one chilly November morning. Her voice was brisk, her tone professional, but her eyes carried something softer. She knew the weight of what I was carrying. "We're building the timeline from the start," she explained. "Delivery of the whiskey, your decision to give it to Robert, the collapse, the hospital, the tests, every piece leads forward." She tapped a stack of files. "Your recordings are central. The index cards show consistent documentation. The raid sealed it. He left us no room for doubt." I nodded, though my chest tightened as she spoke. She said he the way a lawyer has to detached, clinical. But to me, he was Ethan, my son. "Frank," she continued, "the defense will press you hard. They'll question your memory. They'll call your notes obsessive, your recordings paranoid. They'll suggest you planted things exaggerated. Are you ready for that?" I took a long breath. If I survived the nights he circled my house, I can survive their questions. She studied me a moment, then nodded. "Good, because your strength on the stand will carry the case." Later, Reyes met me for coffee near the courthouse. His tie was crooked, his eyes tired, but his voice carried steady as ever. "You've done everything right," he said. "Don't doubt that now." I still wonder I admitted staring into the black coffee I hadn't touched. If I'd handled things differently years ago, if I'd seen the warning signs, stepped in harder. Reyes shook his head. You can't carry his choices as your guilt. You're not responsible for the path he carved. But guilt isn't logical. It lives in the cracks reason can't fill. Back at the hospital, Robert was nearly ready for discharge. He walked the hallway without help, his steps slow but steady. Linda trailed close, her knitting bag swinging from her arm. They both looked more alive than I had seen them in weeks. You've got to stay strong, Frank, Robert told me. The trial's not just about proving what he did. It's about proving you were right to fight back. Don't let them twist that. Leah joined us one afternoon, her face pale but determined. They'll ask me about the jars in the garage, she said. About the names on them. I'll tell them exactly what I saw. Her courage steadied me, though it also reminded me how wide the damage had spread. Ethan's choices hadn't just poisoned a bottle, they had poisoned the trust of everyone who loved him. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the fireproof box open. I pulled out a stack of index cards, flipping through them slowly. Each one was a moment, a piece of evidence, but also a scar. I thought of Claire's words. Your strength on the stand will carry the case. Strength didn't feel like something I had much of left, but maybe strength wasn't about feeling, it was about choosing. Choosing to keep showing up even when every part of me wanted to turn away. The next morning, Reyes called with another update. We've confirmed the toxicology reports. Multiple samples from his jars match the compound in the whiskey. It ties everything together. Good, I said, though. My voice came out flat. Frank Reyes said gently, You've done more than anyone could have asked. Now it's about holding steady. Justice doesn't move fast, but it moves. I thanked him and hung up, staring out at the pale November light filtering through the blinds. The yard was empty. The motion lights hadn't flared in days. The silence outside no longer carried footsteps, but the silence inside me still did. That evening I drove one last time to the hospital before Robert's discharge. He sat by the window, sunlight painting his face in warm gold. You ready for what comes next? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. Doesn't matter if you're ready, he said with a faint grin. It's coming anyway. All you can do is meet it, standing up. On the drive home, I replayed his words. Meet it standing up, not crouched in the corner chair with the recorder clutched like a weapon, not trembling at every silence, standing, facing it. That night I pulled out a blank index card and wrote, Trial ahead. Justice or grief, but no more silence. I slid it into the box with the others, closed the lid, and sat for a long time in the quiet. For once the quiet didn't feel like waiting. It felt like bracing. Because the next time I faced Ethan, it wouldn't be through a window or over a phone line. It would be in a courtroom under oath with every truth laid bare, and I would have to stand tall enough to carry it. The courthouse smelled of old wood and paper, the kind of scent that clings to places where too many truths have been dragged into daylight. I sat at the witness table, my palms flat on the wood, my index cards tucked away in the fireproof box at home. I didn't bring them with me. They'd already been copied, cataloged, turned into exhibits. Still, I felt their weight in my pocket, as if memory itself carried cardboard edges. Ethan sat at the defense table dressed in a suit that didn't fit him, hair combed back too neatly. He didn't look like the boy who used to run barefoot through the yard, or the man who circled my house in the dark. He looked like someone trying to borrow respectability from a jacket and tie. But his eyes, the eyes hadn't changed. Cold, sharp, fixed on me like I was still the only audience that mattered. The prosecutor, Claire Matthews, led me through the story piece by piece. The birthday box, the bottle, Robert's collapse, the lab results, the missing vial, the recordings, my index cards. Each answer I gave felt like another stone added to a pile I'd been carrying for months. But in this room, those stones built something solid, a wall the defense couldn't climb. When it was their turn, the defense lawyer tried to chip at me. "Moinsum, Dalton, you admit you kept handwritten notes, correct index cards?" "Yes." "And you admit you installed alarms, lights, cameras, sat in your chair every night documenting noises?" "Yes." "Would you agree that might seem obsessive?" I looked at him square. "Would you call a man obsessive for writing down the license plate of the truck that tried to run him off the road? For recording a burglar outside his window? I wasn't obsessive. I was surviving." A ripple passed through the courtroom. The lawyer shifted but didn't push further. When Ethan was asked to speak, he tried for calm, but the cracks showed. He blamed stress misunderstandings, his own wife's overreactions. He called my notes lies, my recordings manipulations. But his words slid off the evidence like rain off stone. The jars, the extracts, the letters with my name scrawled across them, those couldn't be explained away. Robert testified, his voice still weak but steady. "One glass almost killed me," he said. "That wasn't bad luck. That was intent." Leah testified, her voice shaking at first, but then hardening. She told the jury about the jars in the garage, the names written on them, the way Ethan's anger had turned inward and sharp. When the trial drew to a close, I sat in the back of the courtroom during closing arguments. Claire's voice was steady, her words simple. "This isn't just about poison in a bottle, it's about poison in choices. And every choice the defendant made leads to one conclusion: he intended harm, he intended silence, he intended death. But his father refused to be silent. His father documented the truth. And that truth is why we're here." The jury left. Hours stretched like days. I sat in the hallway with Robert beside me, Linda knitting in silence, Leah staring at the floor. None of us spoke much. We didn't need to. We were all holding our breath. When the jury returned, the foreman's voice was clear, guilty on all counts. The words rang through me heavy and hollow all at once. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't relief. It was finality. Ethan didn't look at me when the verdict was read. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched as though I'd already ceased to exist. Maybe in his mind, I had. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters clustered their questions sharp. I didn't answer them. I wasn't there for a headline. I was there for survival. That night I sat once more at my kitchen table. The house was silent, the motion lights unlit, the alarms quiet. The fireproof box sat in front of me, its lid closed. I placed one final card inside. On it I wrote, "Trial complete. Verdict guilty. Truth survived." I closed the lid, the click echoing louder than all the knocks, all the phone calls, all the footsteps in the yard. For the first time, the silence in my house felt like peace, not threat. But peace didn't erase the scar. As I sat there, I thought of the lesson carved into me through sleepless nights and whispered recordings. Sometimes the hardest fight isn't against strangers, but against the ones we love. And sometimes love means refusing to look away, even when the truth cuts deeper than poison. I want you, the one listening now, to hear this. Don't let silence cover what you know is wrong. Don't let fear keep you from documenting the truth, even if no one believes you at first. Your voice matters. Your persistence matters. Robert lived because I didn't stay quiet. I lived because I chose to write, to record, to refuse to let the dark swallow me whole. So if you've carried anything with me through this story, let it be this. Silence can kill, but truth, even painful truth, can save. And now I'll leave you with a request. If you've ever faced something hard, something that made you question your own strength, share your story. Drop it in the comments. Let someone else know they're not alone. And if you believe truth is worth standing for even when it hurts, hit subscribe. Because stories like this don't end in silence. They live on in the telling.